Dear audience, welcome to the show POWERchat. In today's episode, we'll be discussing on United Nations support to Nepal with specific reference to United Nations Population Fund's support in Nepal. Joining me today is Ms. Giulia Vallese, country representative of UNFPA to Nepal. Please allow me to welcome her. Welcome to the show, Ms. Vallese.
Thank
How
you
have you been?
Very well, thank you very much for inviting me.
You have been here for last 4 years, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. It will be 4 years at the end of February.
Would you tell your impression over Nepal's overall development process, including that of the cultural, linguistic, and geographical diversity of this nation?
Absolutely, thank you so much. I think what really struck me from the beginning is how diverse Nepal is, in terms of geographical, cultural, ethnic, religious. And I think that poses opportunities and challenges, because on one hand, you want to see the country develop, but in order to promote harmony in diversity, it's very important to really look at the diversity and develop accordingly. So Nepal, I think, overall has made tremendous progress. If you look at, for example, from the beginning of the Millennium Development Goals, tremendous progress. But then if you look at the national average, you get one picture. But what I really think is so important, and that's what we stress all the time, is to really look at disaggregated data. Because if you look at the disaggregated data across the districts, across the ethnic caste and age, then you really see disparities. And if you really want to promote a harmonious development and progress across the country, you really need to identify those pockets that maybe are lagging behind and really invest more in those pockets. And that's one of the things that we try to do by producing and using data, disaggregated data.
What are the major areas that Nepal needs to invest in your work, especially that of the UNFPA, in your experience?
For us, really, it's so important to invest in reproductive health, in gender equality, because we know that Nepal still has quite a few challenges when it comes to gender equality. So anything between child marriage prevention, for example, is one area where we need to invest much more, because those social issues that we are facing, like lack of opportunities, lack of access to family planning, for example, they have enormous consequences, not only socially but also economically. So if the country wants to continue to develop from an economic point of view, you really have to invest on social issues.
Do you mean that when diversity is not understood well, this creates problem to the process of development?
You definitely need to understand diversity, because you need to have different responses to development depending on the type of issues that you're dealing with. So for example, to address child marriage, some programs that may work in the Far West may not work at the same time in the Terai, for example. So you really need to understand what are the barriers, what are the challenges, and how then can you address those challenges.
I will come back to you on those. Would you share about the UNFPA's major programs in Nepal? How does UNFPA work with its development assistance, its partnerships and coordination?
Yes. So our mission statement reads, and I have it right here, and UNFPA delivers a world where every pregnancy is wanted, every birth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. So our major area of work is about reproductive health. So anything to do with giving access to family planning, ensuring safe motherhood, preventing or addressing the issue of teenage pregnancy, for example, but also when it comes to enabling adolescents, to have the information that they need in terms of their sexuality. Another big area has to do with gender equality. So preventing gender-based violence. Particularly, we focus on the health response to gender-based violence, so empowering the health responders to address gender-based violence, addressing child marriage, as I mentioned. And then the third area is to produce that evidence, generate the data and the evidence that you need to inform policies and plans. This is, in a nutshell, some of the work we do in Nepal. And we have been here for decades, and we are very happy to see the progress in many areas, but also the challenges that lie ahead.
Do you think that the slogan that UNFPA puts for its global mission, including that of every child birth is safe and every young person's potential is fulfilled, with a world where every pregnancy is wanted, how do you assess this slogan in the context of Nepal?
As I mentioned earlier, Nepal has done a lot of progress when it comes to safe delivery, for example. If you look at the data, you have now more than 50% of women who deliver in either in a health post or in a hospital or with skilled birth attendants, right? So there's been a lot of progress. But again, if you look at disparities across the country, then there are some challenges that remain. So a lot of progress, but much more that needs to be done. Family planning is another area where the government of Nepal has done a lot to provide access to family planning, but there are still high unmet need, for example, among adolescents. So, and I think Nepal now needs to focus much more on its young population, because if you look at the composition of Nepal, it's very young. And Nepal is going through a demographic transition. So unless you invest in your young population, you will not be able to reap the benefit of that investment. And you have a window right now that Nepal is going through, and that window will close at some point. So it's so important for Nepal now to invest in its young population when it comes to education, employment, health. All these areas are very, very important.
Well, how do you work with the stakeholders, including that of the non-governmental organizations
Sure.
and the government agencies?
Yes, as a UN agency, of course, we are here at the request of government, and we are here to support primarily the government in its efforts, in its plans, based on our comparative advantage. And this applies to all UN agencies in Nepal. But of course, when it comes to implementing, we have the different types of implementation. So we work through government, but we also work through civil society, because it's so important, and they have such an important role, and very often complementary to that of the government. So when it comes to service delivery, for example, it's very often the civil society that is there on the ground also to support government's efforts. So we have a variety of mechanisms. So NGOs or civil societies are very, very important, and we work, and we also support coordination, and sometimes we broker partnership between the government and the civil society and try to promote a coordinated approach to support the development priorities of Nepal.
Often the programs or projects that the international communities, including that of United Nations, even specialized agencies like UNFPA and others, they work with the government agencies and NGOs, civil society organizations. Their work is sometimes criticized for not delivering what the people are expected to receive. How do you monitor your funding support
Yes.
with the government agencies and other stakeholders?
Right. We work on 5-year program cycles. So first of all, when we develop a new program, which is what we are doing right now, by the way, we consult as much as possible. So right now, for example, we are doing a series of consultation with government stakeholders, with beneficiaries, with young people, with different stakeholders, precisely to try and capture what is it that we should focus on for the next cycle. What is it that is needed more than anything? Of course, within, as I said, our what we can offer, right? Because we have a very specific mandate. So that's one. In terms of monitoring or having a program that responds to the priority, it's so important to have a strong results-based management system. So with a monitoring and evaluation system where you choose then indicators to monitor progress of your program, and then you have to have baselines. So where am I starting with now, and where do I want to be in 5 years' time, for example? And then you have to identify, okay, on an annual basis, where do I want to go? What do I want to achieve? And how am I going to collect that data that can support whether or not I've made the progress? So it's so important to have a very robust M&E system that you can then apply and monitor over time to see, am I really achieving the results? Do I have to change, etc.
How do you assess the overall impact of United Nations presence in Nepal with reference to your own agency, UNFPA?
Yes. Well, in these last years, I mean, we have been in Nepal for about 40 years, but in the last few years, I can say, because that's what I can talk to mostly, is that we have a very robust M&E system. So I think we have been able, it's always not always easy to say, okay, what am I contributing to and what is directly my contribution. So that's always a challenge for everybody. How do you attribute results, or how do you contribute to results? And of course, a lot of the funding we receive come from donors directly, so it's also important to give them credit. But I would say that in the areas where we work with, we have seen quite a lot of progress, particularly when it comes to, as I said, family planning, child marriage reduction. These are just area. Comprehensive sexuality education is another area where I think you can see now quite a lot of results, concretely. For the first time, Nepal will have midwives, professional midwives, and I think UNFPA is really at the forefront of advocating for midwifery. So these are just examples, I think, of areas where we have seen quite a lot of progress, and some of it is also thanks to our efforts, I would not say.
There are media criticism sometimes on the support is not properly utilized. There are no direct beneficiaries of the support that United Nations supports with.
Yes.
How do you assess the works carried out by, again, the civil society organization and government agencies you work with?
We have just completed an evaluation actually of our current country program that is looking also at issues such as efficiency, effectiveness, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that has come out very strongly is that having a presence on the ground, and we work in 18 districts at the moment, and we have country presence or field presence in all of these districts and at the regional level, really helps in monitoring exactly what you're saying, in really showing, am I really contributing to the people on the ground, and am I really listening to them? So I think from that perspective, I think what has really helped us is to be present there on the ground and really monitor what's going on, and we will continue doing that because it's very, very important.
You are here for last 4 decades.
4 years.
4 years. No, I mean UNFPA.
Oh, UNFPA, yes.
Presence here is for last 4 decades.
Yes.
What are the measures, impacts or changes that you can explain to us, especially with reference to that of the child marriage? Are the cases of child marriage minimized, or any other discrimination against women in the name of culture? There are increasing stories in the media that a child has been molested or sexually abused,
Yes.
or some abuses have been carried out against the children or women. How do you assess this? Do you see the change?
I can say that certainly there's been progress, but we also have to be careful, because I think one area that is where Nepal is doing much better, it's in terms of reporting. And you have more and more women and adolescents who are empowered to report, to go to the police, for example, to report on abuses. So all of a sudden you see an increase in reports. Now, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden the number of abuses have increased. It could simply mean that more people are reporting about it, and you think there is more happening. Having said that, I think the data shows that, for example, child marriage has decreased, yes, but it's still very, very high. You have about 40% of girls who marry before the age of 18, actually, not even 20, which is the new, legal age for marriage. So a lot still needs to be done. Similarly, when it comes to abuses or violence against women, or sexual violence in particular, we have seen also during the earthquake, a lot of cases have been reported, because when you have problems with law and order, and you don't have the fabric of society to help, then you have more cases of violence. So it's so important to continue providing the services, but also generate awareness and empower the women to make sure that they can also know how to prevent that, but also what to do in case there is abuse.
Where should the United Nations or other donor agencies, including government of Nepal, invest upon or prioritize their activities? Is it in the areas of creating awareness, or the presence of the state agencies at the local level?
I think you need a multi-sectoral approach. Not one solution will work. Let me take again the example of child marriage. You also have to look at root causes, right? Why are people marrying young, and what can be done about it? So only empowering the girls will not work, because you might empower a girl if she's in an environment that is hostile or where she's forced to marry, then that's not going to be a solution. So you need to work with the parents, you need to work with the religious leaders, who have a very important role to play, you know, to prevent and stop child marriage. So generating awareness is so important for people to understand why is child marriage bad, what are the consequences of child marriage. At the same time, you need to, of course, work with the police and with the, you know, state agency to ensure that they also understand that, let's say, conciliation or not acting, you know, if they know that a child marriage is happening, is also not right. So you really need to work, you know, at different level. If, for example, a girl is married, right, because some of them are already married, you need to help her not to get pregnant right away. But we know that in Nepal there's a lot of pressure for girls to, or for women to, once they get married, to immediately bear a child, and very often they want to have a son, right? Son preference is very strong. So you also need to help those women with their, you know, mother-in-law, the sasus and whatever, to delay pregnancy so that they can only get pregnant once they're ready to get pregnant. So these are just examples that shows that unless you invest, you know, in the different components of society, it will be very difficult to make further progress in areas, for example, of child marriage.
What is your assessment on the accomplishment of MDGs already completed with, and there is another program, Sustainable Development Goals. So
yes.
do you have any specific program that addresses UNFPA's mandate in Nepal?
Yes. Well, MDGs, Nepal has done tremendously well, but again, at the national level. So if you look at the national averages, I think Nepal has met most of the Millennium Development Goals. But if you start looking at the disaggregated data, for example, maternal mortality, overall Nepal has done extremely well. Look at the disaggregated data that the census provided, for example, and then you will see that in some parts of Nepal it's still unacceptably high, much, much higher than the national average. So again, I keep saying, and in a federal context, it will be very important to again have the disaggregated data to know, okay, where do I need to focus the most in addition to the national average? Having said that, when it comes to the SDGs, on one hand, they are there to really look at the unfinished Millennium Development Goals. For UNFPA, we have a number of goals that are directly related to our work. Of course, health being one, reproductive health. Education, as I mentioned earlier, we also work in, you know, empowering adolescents through comprehensive sexuality education as one example. Gender equality, clearly, number 5, also very important. Child marriage, gender-based violence. But also there are other goals that link with, again, data, generating data, and I think it's goal number 10, which is also very important for us and for Nepal. So we already are working very closely with the government of Nepal to again establish what are the targets that are relevant for Nepal. So where should Nepal be in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, and how can the different actors then contribute to help Nepal move in that direction?
What, according to your experience in Nepal, you are staying here for last 4 years, Nepal should invest upon, especially in relations to the development, including that of the infrastructure and human development? Right.
Nepal is a very young population, so I think, and as I mentioned earlier, there is a window of opportunity that Nepal is going through right now. And so it's so crucial to invest in its young population. And there is this, we work on this so-called demographic dividend index, which looks at different criteria: empowerment, education, employment. Empowerment, the indicator used is child marriage. Education is secondary education, because we know we have done very well on primary education. And the third one is employment, so providing employment opportunity for the young people so that they don't only migrate, but they also have an opportunity to stay in Nepal and contribute to the development. So for me, it's crucial to really focus on investing in this young population, because once Nepal will be aging, which will happen at some point, you'll have more dependent population and less young population to look after the dependent population, the children and the elderly. That window will close, and so at some point Nepal will have lost important benefits if it doesn't invest. So for me, that's should be number 1 priority. So continuous investment in employment, education, and empowerment at all levels.
What should be done to, there is a trend of brain drain. The adolescents or young people, they are leaving this country for employment.
Yes.
How can the young minds or young people, they can work in this country so that there are some opportunities? What should government do?
Well, I think the government in its 14th plan has already identified some of the priorities. You know, for example, agriculture is still a sector that employs a lot of people, but it's not necessarily modernized, or it's not really specializing in very crucial, areas, that are more profitable. So that's clearly another one area. Tourism is clearly another area that can generate a lot of employment opportunities. So I think the 14th development plan already provides some good, direction in terms of what should be done. Vocational training is also so important, because right now you have an education system, but do we have enough vocational training that can help create employment or create skills? We know that 75% of the Nepali that leave the country for migration are unskilled. So I think it will be very important to work on their skills so that they can, if they choose to migrate, that's fine, but they should also have an opportunity in Nepal based on the skills they acquire, in the different areas. So vocational training and investing in areas that have great potential, like, as I said, tourism, agriculture, as examples.
Well, Ms. Vallese, there are a lot of things to discuss, but we are coming to the end of the show.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific things to share to our audience in relation to your work?
I really hope that, as I said, Nepal will continue prioritizing on its young population, because I think they are the future of this country, and this country has a lot of potential, and I really, wish it all the best, and with all the diversity, and I really hope that harmony will continue to prevail in this country that is so beautiful and diverse. Thank you very much.
Well, Ms. Vallese, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Yes.
Dear audience, time now to wrap up the show. Keep watching us. See you next week. Namaste.